I never trained biceps, yeah? And I tell people it's impossible for you to be strong at weighted pull-ups and have small biceps. I also tell them it's impossible for you to have a big back and small biceps because you can never grow your back without using your biceps.
Apparently, it's impossible to have a big back but with small biceps. Apparently, it's impossible to have a strong way to pull up but have lagging biceps. These, in my humble opinion, are very confident and questionable statements, which left me interested to see just how accurate these statements are in terms of training calisthenics and muscle hypertrophy. So let me stop yapping and let's get right into this video. Now, if you watch my content or perhaps just stumbled upon my page, then I'm sure you do calisthenics or at least heard of calisthenics. And if you do calisthenics, I'm quite sure that you've might have stumbled upon a guy named Barseagle, who is honestly dominating the calisthenics scene, especially upon TikTok, Instagram. He is blowing up in regards to the strength and skills that he just showcases within his training sessions. And without glazing him too much, because let's be honest, his fan base does that literally enough, like no cap. I want to make sure that I get my standpoint clear. I'm not coming for Barseagle in any way to defame his character, his experience, or knowledge. Because like I said, this guy's the real deal in terms of just what he's accomplished within the calisthenics and weighted calisthenics scene. However, it doesn't mean that he is perfect regarding his knowledge, regarding his advice, because there is a big flaw to what he said. Some of the training concepts that he constantly mentions is very questionable in terms of its validity, which leads on to the first questionable advice that he mentions to his audience. Do compound lifts, you don't need isolation movements. But don't take my word for it, just see it for yourself.
More than 95% of the movements for back will never leave you with small arms. So training arms is kinda extra unless you do bodybuilding and you're trying to hit every single muscle fiber in your body. So work on the compound lifts. Find some exercises that are very major exercises like weighted dips, weighted pull-ups, bench, rows, and find one of them that you really love for each muscle group and work on it. Have the goal to get stronger, and with time, once you get better and better, you will always want more and more until you get to a point where you're so strong that you're close to beating world records. So again, do compound lifts. You don't need isolated movements.
Okay, so based on what we just covered, the premise of Ian's point of view is that one doesn't need to train isolation movements because compound-based movements like the pull-ups, the dips, the rows will take care of the majority of your efforts to build muscle and, of course, improving your strength adaptations. So this is true to some degree, but it's not the best advice for majority of people. Reason being is if all you're doing is centering your workout plan around just compound movements, then this will lead to something called the torso dominance phenomena. And torso dominance is a very real thing, don't get me wrong, meaning one's chest or back can be predominantly greater in musculature compared to one's limbs, in other words, your arms. And whether or not you experience torso dominance from this compound heavy focus style of training may occur from one of these variables, such as whether or not you're a high or low responder to muscle building in regards to your training. And according to an article published by the National Science of Medicine, factors such as IGF-1, myogenin, and the muscle fiber cross-sectional area all contribute to the body's ability to regulate tissue growth and muscle development. And with higher increases in said factors, this will constitute one being a high responder to building muscle. Now, the reason to why I bring up the evidence based on why one can be more naturally gifted to build muscle than the other is because this will have a direct correlation in regards to whether or not you can get away with training just compound movements and having a high response to building muscle, which will lead to a muscular physique. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, if you're not blessed with the high responder attributes, then you're going to be a low responder and you're not going to be responding well to those compound movements to focus on building a well-rounded muscular physique. Hence why I mentioned torso dominance, that dreadful spider physique that we definitely do not want to have. So if we're talking about the advice that Ian presented, it's not going to be working for everybody. More specifically, it's not going to work for the groups of people who are low responders to muscle hypertrophy, but rather it's going to be helping those who just won the genetic lottery, those who have high responders, those who have genetics similar to Ian Barseagle. And we cannot deny how well gifted Ian's genetics is, more specifically his bicep genetics and his leanness. And if you refer back to my video about why people are transitioning to calisthenics, I've touched upon a principle that's really important to this particular video about how big a muscle could look can vastly differ upon these 4 contributing variables: muscle insertions, muscle mass, leanness, and finally, exercise selection. And if you look at pictures from when Ian was younger, I'm talking 14 to 16 years old, even with minimal training experience, you can tell that he already has well-developed biceps, and he also has a very lean body. And as he continues to train, get stronger, and build muscle over the years, and based off his advice, if he truly trained just pull-ups, rows, and other compound movements without having the focus of training isolations to specifically grow the biceps, we can see that his biceps were still able to grow. But does that mean, Cobra, that his particular advice and training method is the most recommendable approach for majority of people, and that everyone should just train like him? The answer is quite simple, honestly. It's no. That's because Ian has good genetics. He is a high responder in regards to building muscle, and the criteria for how big a muscle appears to be is contingent upon muscle insertions, muscle mass, leanness, and also exercise selection. If you do not have the genetic lottery for the right muscle insertions, that cannot literally be changed because it's God-given to you. And we all know that Ian has great bicep insertions because his bicep tendons run short, which will give a more pleasing appearance, a more muscular appearance at the bicep peak, which is great for aesthetics. So because of him having short bicep tendons, this will play in his favor to dictate just how muscular his biceps appear to be. Then is muscle mass. The more muscle mass you have, the more muscular your particular muscle will be, obviously. However, you do need to take into account that someone with poor bicep insertions, meaning having a longer running tendon with similar amounts of muscle mass as Ian Barseagle, for example, will aesthetically speaking seem to appear as a smaller bicep. Thirdly is leanness. If you're lean, then you're just going to increase the visibility of that muscle group. Pretty self-explanatory if I don't say so myself. This will easily skew the appearance of how muscular and the appearance of one muscle will look like. Then we have exercise selection. If you're choosing exercises that don't best stimulate your intended muscle group, then the end result, unfortunately, is going to be a suboptimal development of your muscle group, which in our case is going to be the biceps. No matter how strong you get or how hard you train, if you're not directing your efforts in the right exercises that primarily activates your desired muscle group, the results will not be in favor if you carry low responding attributes. Now here's where the nuances comes to play. If you're a high responder to muscle hypertrophy, you can get away with training with suboptimal exercises and not specifically targeting your training efforts into each and every muscle group. You will simply just grow, which I want all of you guys who are watching to realize that's the case for Ian and those like him. However, on the under end of the spectrum, if you're a low responder to muscle hypertrophy, then it's imperative that you choose exercises that will place the best stress on your specific muscle group to induce muscle hypertrophy. Now the big question is Ian Barseagle leading people with false narratives in regards to his exercise selection? Cobra, are you saying that the pull-ups are not going to be developing my biceps? Well, for me to answer this question thoroughly enough, I gotta break down what causes muscle growth at a high level. So the main drivers for muscle growth is gonna be mechanical tension, metabolic stress, and muscle damage. And to briefly summarize, mechanical tension occurs when the muscles begin to contract, causing high levels of stress to the muscle fibers, such as lifting heavy enough loads or placing enough stress on a muscle, which studies indicate training between 80 to 90% of your 1 rep max for 3 to 5 reps will induce the highest levels of mechanical tension. Then the other component is metabolic stress, a phenomenon that occurs when a muscle is stimulated enough, which releases built-up byproducts such as lactate and hydrogen ions, which play a contributing factor to stimulating muscle growth. And achieving this can be done by training as low as 30% of your 1 rep max, aiming for higher repetitions. Then the third contributing factor for causing muscle growth is muscle damage, specifically micro tears to damage muscle fibers by resulting in training isometrics, concentrics, and according to an article published by the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research Association, the greatest damage to muscle tissue is seen with eccentric exercises, where muscles are forcibly lengthened, resulting in muscle repairing agents to stimulate muscle growth. Now, in order to tie all this information together, this next point is going to bring it full circle. In order to decide what is the best exercise for building muscle in our specific use case, the biceps, a good ballpark, a good rough estimate is to start off with muscle recruitment. And if you look at the EMG studies regarding the pull-ups in the context of the bicep brachii compared to that of the chin-ups, the chin-up exercise generated greater activation of the bicep brachii when compared to the pull-up because the forearm was supinated, palms facing the subject when gripping the horizontal bar. Movement scientists have reported that the bicep brachii muscles develop its maximal EMG signal and peak torque production with simultaneous elbow flexion and supination. Taking that into account, it's important to note that EMG studies doesn't necessitate more muscle growth, as it's much more intricate variables that needs to be taken into account for what causes muscle growth. But at the very least, hear me out. It puts you in a more comfortable position to understand that the chin-ups will put you in a position to recruit more muscle activation of the biceps compared to that of the pull-ups. However, does this mean that one can just train the chin-ups and completely neglect their bicep isolation training? Because I've did all this yapping and researching just to land on the same principle that Ian is preaching to his audience. But just to switch to another exercise from the pull-ups to the chin-ups, then I'll be, no cap, wasting y'all's time. Well, thankfully, the answer is no, I'm not wasting your time. I'm just providing context and kind of a nice storytelling aspect to this whole issue. But this actually reminds me of a video that I watched way back when from Leonatus, and he actually explains it perfectly, so listen closely.
So I'm not saying that you're not gonna have nice arms in general. No, you're gonna get some pretty good gains with chin-ups. Like, it's much better advice than what the powerlifters are suggesting, straight up. But it's gonna come to a halt at some point. What I mean is, your back will eventually outpace your biceps by a significant extent. So you just getting stronger and stronger, you might end up getting wider and wider, which isn't a bad thing. That looks pretty fucking badass. Everybody wants a V-taper. But your biceps might stall if you're not isolating. And this is why the actual experts, not those dudes you see at the park just randomly being interviewed. No, the real deal, like fitness FAQs, will advise direct bicep work, like ring curls to focus on the short position and pelican curls to focus on the lengthened position. So that is in fact a maximized way to train.
Now, after watching this, can any one of y'all, including me, say that training compound movements without direct isolation exercises to supplement your compound movements is the recommendable approach, especially for building your biceps or building your triceps, the smaller muscle groups? I'm not talking about isolating your back or isolating your chest. Those can be big differences of opinion whether or not you need to isolate them. I'm kind of a team of compounds will take care of the majority of your muscle groups, but you got to fine tune the smaller muscle groups with direct isolation work, considering that you're a low responder. Now, if you're a high responder, like I said, you can get away with it. Going back to my original point, I like Ian, but the advice that he's promoting, not just once, not twice, but multiple videos that I've seen, is just not gonna be the most recommendable approach that most people need to take. Because I genuinely think that if anyone took this advice, and it's not just Ian by himself, there's other creators doing the same as well, and neglected direct bicep or small muscle group training, coupled that with being a low responder to muscle hypertrophy, you will get stronger with the weighted pull-ups or the weighted chin-ups. There's no doubt. Keep training those weighted pull-ups, keep training those weighted chin-ups, but if that's all you do, you're going to have a spider physique. You're going to be torso dominant. So if I were you, I proceed with caution, but hey, what do I know? If you want to see more content like this, be sure to follow me, man. I'm a tough fitness guy out here, no cap.
Cobra Trains, he's up next. Make sure y'all subscribe to him. He's number one out here.
He's the toughest fitness guy out here.